Hi, folks. Welcome to the session on the open source, how open source is shaping the Observability. It's just the discussion about anything related to Observability coming from the open standards, not just restricted to the OpenTelemetry. Hi, my name is Krishna Yadappanavar. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kloudfuse, which is an Observability company with advanced analytics and automation built in, with interesting LLM models deployed on top of the Observability data. We are a team of around like 40 plus engineers with a deep background in building large-scale distributed systems, large-scale databases, ML pipelines, data transformations from different companies in the Silicon Valley. And we have been working with like quite a few customers to solve the Observability problems. Let's start with like what are the fundamental problems in the Observability space, right? With the advent of like Kubernetes and serverless, there is like ever increasing complexity of the issues when it comes to the various deployments, because of which there is an essentially like four kinds of problems that have emerged, what I call as like the 4 Cs. The first is like the cardinality, the control, the cost, and the causality of the overall solution. Cardinality is like when you take like the potential Cartesian product of the various values, Observability data can be associated with it. That Cartesian product can go into multiple millions and billions, and that causes this weird problem of finding how to find that attribute that really caused the problem for the current incident. Control is most of the solutions out there are all talking about sending the data outside the customer's premises or the customer VPC, leading to lack of control of the data. Control of the data is not from the point of view of like the security or the compliance or the egress or the ingress cost, but in addition, bringing the right interfaces on top of the data, right open source interfaces on top of the data, not just restricted to the Observability query languages, but even more advanced query languages like SQL and GraphQL and things like that. Finding the root cause is almost an impossible problem in this space. It's a really NP-hard problem, but how do we reduce the scope of troubleshooting or scope of root cause analysis so that you can get to the minimal number of the data that matters to the developers, DevOps, and the SREs is very, very critical. And if you look at the challenges here, there are way too many like fragmented tools, and because of which they have the proprietary interfaces. The cost of the data goes higher and higher, given the fact that most of the solutions are like SaaS based. And then because of which the developers and the DevOps are feeling that they are inflexible, they are not scalable, and they need innovation beyond like just like an Observability stack. So if you look at like the entire ecosystem in the Observability, like it starts from the left-hand side, which is the instrumentation. How do I instrument the data? How do I collect the right attributes? How do I collect the right signals from the source? Ingest it in a format which is open source compatible, build an efficient Observability pipelines along the way, and then think of like building a data lake where you can run any kind of interesting analytics and the queries on top of the Observability data. With the advent of like emerging models in AI and LLM, it's very interesting to bring those interfaces, which are again open source compatible, on top of the Observability data. Things like advanced functions like anomaly detection, outlier detection, correlation, causation. These are some to name here. And then the overall format in which the data is stored, the format in which the data is queried has to go well with how this data needs to be sort of like stored, ingested, indexed, and queried within the according to the customer needs. The entire deployment model should be such that it is very conducive with respect to the customer environments and their needs. So one of the fundamental principles the industry is moving towards is don't try to embed any proprietary instrumentation or proprietary sort of attribute addition or proprietary instrumentation for the various languages within their code. I mean, this is not only to enhance the fact that you can easily update as the open source community progresses towards like better instrumentation, and also scaling the internal code changes. And the whole ecosystem has to support all the observability stream of the data. So unification is very, very critical, because to solve the problem of like the causality, you need to bounce from one stream of the data, which is like metrics, to the traces and the logs, and vice versa. And various open standards have emerged in case of ingestion, like coming from the instrumentation side. There is like Open, which has emerged. On the agent side, there are quite a few like open source compatible agents, like the Prometheus remote write on the metric side, and Open FluentBit, FileBeat, Logstash, FluentD, OpenTelemetry on the log side, and OpenTelemetry has emerged. And in fact, most of like the commercial vendors also have put the instrumentation and the agents in the open source. And then it has to collect the data across the various data sources, whether it is coming from your application, open source components, or any platform or infrastructure components running in different cloud or even on-prem, or the traditional virtualization stand platforms like VMware or OpenShift or Kubernetes. And then there has to be interoperability with respect to all the tools and the platforms. To enable this, we need to think of a platform where, rather a data lake, where it is completely open with respect to how the data is stored. The formats have emerged with respect to like things like Parquet, so that which will enable you, the customers, to leverage the capabilities of the data in a better way. The platform or the Observability pipelines should be able to transform one data into another data in a very consistent form. Things like, hey, can I emit metrics out of the like raw log lines? Log lines could be structured or completely unstructured, or traces, metrics derived from the traces, the outliers and the anomalies derived from the logs and the metrics, and can I surface the relevant information out of that? And also, with the high cardinality problem coming in, there is quite a bit of information that is missing in the Observability pipelines these days. How do I get the relevant information with respect to the cardinality, what we call as a cardinality analysis? And can I put better controls with respect to the cardinality of the data? The cardinality analysis could be, how do I get a particular metric name and how many metric points that are getting emerged, like the data points, what they call, or it could be different labels associated with the metrics. It could be facets within the log lines. It could be attributes within the traces and things like that. Pre-aggregating to derive the interesting metrics out of that data is really necessary. And the newly transformed data has to be again stored in an open source compatible way and queried in an open source compatible way. That way, you will avoid any vendor lock-in, not only from the ingestion point of view, but also from the queries point of view. And then the next question comes is like, because of like the sheer volume of the data, can I think of a solution, or can I think of a platform which will scale as the volume of the data goes higher and higher? In the recent like traditional database technologies, the OLAPs have emerged really successful in this area, and they have come out with like really good columnar and schemaless indexing technologies, so that the data can be not only traditionally compressed, but can also be encoded in a very efficient way using the dictionary encoding, double data encoding, gorilla encoding, but also things like deduplication of the data on top of a particular set of patterns have emerged. These sort of help in three ways. That open formatness gives an ability to ingest at really high speed with the minimum resources like compute and memory. It helps to store the data with the relevant indexes in an open source compatible way. It also helps you to query the data with the, again, minimum resources on the compute and the memory side. Fundamentally, the cost is one of the key dimensions which will drive as the resources are getting consumed to ingest, index, and query the data. So now, coming from the other side with respect to the consumers, There are various consumers of this Observability data. Traditionally, developers, DevOps, SREs come from the traditional Observability data, what they call as the MELT, metrics, logs, events, and traces. But there could be security operations guys who are looking with the lens of the security and the threat analysis from the logs itself. With the emergence of the large-scale language models, applications are getting built so that the similar technologies like distributed tracing can be leveraged to solve the observability problems in the LLM space. Again, when the LLM ops guys look with the lens of what is relevant out of that data, we need to surface the right data with respect to how the model is performing, how is like your evaluation thing, what's the drift model, various parameters which are typically used in the LLM operations. And the same thing with the FinOps. The FinOps person are looking from the observability from the cost point of view. But if you look at the interfaces side to query that data, the customers and the various persona like the DevOps, SecOps, and LLMs and FinOps guys are looking for the traditional ways of querying the data using the standard query languages like PromQL, LogQL, TraceQL, and even SQL, GraphQL. But they are looking for more open source compatible interfaces like they are used to in the traditional BI and the analytics world, so that they can slice and dice the data. The traditional things like creation of the dashboards, alerts, SLOs, SLIs continue to dominate the space. But again, all the queries backing these sources have to be 100% compatible with like the open source. Then the question comes is like, apart from providing the observability for the LLM itself, how can we leverage some of the statistical models and the ML models which are developed at very large scale companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, can be leveraged to the observability data. Very good example is like, how do I do an efficient outlier detection or anomaly detection or forecasting of the data? Facebook has done quite a bit of work in this with respect to different algorithms like Profit and random robust forest cut algorithm, which are developed inside like Netflix and Amazon, which talk about slicing and dicing the data and then finding the anomalies on top of the data. These models really help in deriving the value on top of like the observability data. This is one of the key value props by bringing the right open source compatible models and extending the query languages to provide these models into the observability stack itself. That way, the finding the needle in the haystack becomes a very easy problem. Again, the point is to get to the root cause, and it is possible that the underlying root cause might not be correctly surfaced using these models, but it will reduce so-called as the redundant data that people would have spent quite a bit of time to troubleshoot the issues. Similarly, with respect to the quality and the fine-tuning of the models can also be done on top of this data itself. So in short, if I step back, then going back to the 3 C's, you need to have the choice of observability platform, which is scalable, which with respect to the data, but doesn't scale its cost with respect to the direct data volume or the amount of the data which is queried. Should have a clear notion of the ownership of the data. The ownership of the data comes from the fact that we can store within the customer VPC or the developer close to the developers, efficient interfaces on top of which the developers need, things like various query languages, various visualizations, like Grafana has become the standard. People are thinking like, hey, can I use like Superset or like things like Spark connectors on top of the data too. Sharing of the data and integrations with the various data sources should be easy. It should have a robust model of the data security built in as part of the solution. And especially when it comes to streams like distributed tracing and the logs, processing in the open format, and also allowing the data to be stored for the long-term analysis and retrieval of the data for the efficient analytics is very, very important. To solve these problems, bringing an observability data rather than using 3 or 4 different databases or 3 or 4 different solutions to solve the metrics, logs, trace problems, but consolidating into one Observability data lake where the data can be transformed to one layer to the another layer and provide all the capabilities with respect to any changes that are happening on the source side, on the architectural side, and similarly scaling the solution needed to store that Observability data are very, very critical. The platform should be compatible in maintaining and version controls so that it can be easily upgraded. There are various advantages of storing the data within the VPC, but there has to be a clear way of separation of how do I manage that data using the control plane. Manageability is one of the key aspects in the Observability because so many things can go wrong, whether it is at the instrumentation level, at the agent level, at the data level, at the query level. You have to have the clear separation of the data plane and the control plane, and both the data plane and the control plane should be easily accessible using the open standards. Just summing up my final thoughts, building a future-proof strategic framework should include the data unification of all the Observability data, whether it is the traditional, what they call as the MELT, metrics, events, logs, traces. There are new streams that have emerged with respect to real user monitoring and continuous profiling. There has to be a complete balance in the open source with respect to both manageability of the data and the data access itself. And you need to build an architecture which is future-proof, keeping in mind the cost, the cardinality, control, and the causality. Thanks.